The Dead Space remake looms large on the horizon, and there are at least 7 people in the world that are excited about it. But we honestly have to sit here and really just admire the divine irony of EA reviving Dead Space after destroying the franchise and straight up killing Visceral Games. See, Dead Space was a promising franchise cut down in its prime by corporate greed and... No, just corporate greed. Dumbasses tried to make survival horror a multimedia phenomenon, completely ignoring the absolutely tiny niche it exists in, and now seems as good a time as any to talk about the game that ended it all. Dead Space 3 was the nail in the coffin, and I'm going to dig up the rotten corpse and parade it around for your viewing pleasure. Join me as we ask the question, how bad was Dead Space 3 really? Now, everything that I'm going to say has probably been said before by a lot of other people, but I'm the one saying it now, which makes me the victor. So let's get started.
Glad to hear that.
The game starts with a very brief synopsis of the last 2 games, and I've got really mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, it helps give those who haven't played the games in the last 2 years a quick refresher on the plot. On the other hand, as I am very acutely aware that this is an EA title, this feels like it was an onboarding thing for new players, which is typically not what you want to be doing for the finale of a story. Then into Isaac's $3,000 a month apartment as he has a breakdown and is ambushed by Carver out of the 9th dimension. Then he gets told that he has to save the galaxy again, and also his not girlfriend Ellie is missing. Also, the Unitology cult led by this slimy British man has killed the entire space military and are setting off markers across space because they really want to get them some freaky arm blades. I honestly don't understand who looks at the necromorphs and goes,
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
But that's why I'm not in a cult, I guess. Making like our real life billionaires, we flee into space to find a not girlfriend and end up in a minefield, lose the ship and most of the crew. Things are going great so far. Waltz through the derelict ship and find Ellie, the not girlfriend. She found out the Admiral knows about the MacGuffin and also is dating military man. Ellie, not the Admiral, she's dead. Anyway, you'll be reminded of this fact repeatedly. That Robert and Ellie are dating, not that the Admiral's dead. Fast forward to the Admiral's room and Carver appears out of the ether this time because I've played the game in single player and the game clearly doesn't know how to process this. Isaac has a mild mental breakdown and learns that the marker signal is coming from the planet, so they need to repair a ship and fly it down. Before that though, Rob tries to get you on side with just abandoning the mission to save humanity and reminds you that he's dating your ex. The ship gets repaired, then you fly down to the planet, but this is a Dead Space game, so that goes as well as you can expect. Safe landing aside, Isaac walks around the frozen waste until he finally discovers the team, and Robert. Then the cult turns up and tries to kill everyone. After more killing, we then have to pop inside a giant corpse to track down the source of the signal, but it turns out that Robert has betrayed us and is expecting the cult weirdos to let everyone else live but Clark, which is obviously the dumbest thought process ever. And then Robert dies in a freak firearm accident, and can we just take a moment to talk about how stupid this entire subplot is? I mean, this never needed to exist. Robert literally just started getting extremely overprotective of his relationship, and it just continues from there, with no one addressing it and everyone making it worse.
Yeah.
I love you. You know that, right?
What? Yeah, of course.
Literally half the issues in the game are caused by jealousy, just to add tension, because screw me sideways, the plot is so boring. So intensely boring. The plot is so generic, and I'm pretty sure it's because they really increased the scope of the game. It's gone from self-contained stories of fighting for survival to escape the horror to a grand adventure to save the entire human race from annihilation, and a lot of the subtlety and nuance is just lost because of it, and so is the horror. Game devs past, present and future, hear my words. Horror does not survive escalation. The higher the stakes of the adventure, the less scary things become. And of course, you can't get attached to any of the characters because they never get any development, and you know they're just going to die anyway. And you also know who's going to live because it's obvious and their plot armor is big, bulky and as subtle as a railway spike lobotomy. Also, there's like some 11-hour weirdness with aliens, sentient death moons, and classic Dead Space final boss being absolute crap. But if you're actually still paying attention to the plot at this point, then you've got a longer attention span than I do.
Eyes forward, Isaac. Pay attention.
The most important thing to note about the gameplay of Dead Space 3, they showed the cover-based shooting first. And while it disappears after about 10 minutes, these games don't put mechanics in them if they're going to use them only once. But then we get into space and the classic Dead Space, the claustrophobia, the isolation, the jump scares, and the limb ripping. And it would be a perfect return to form if it weren't for one major thing: the game's crafting system. You see, they decided to give you the ability to craft and modify your own guns, which isn't a bad thing on its own, it's what they did to shoehorn it in. You see, they gutted the survival aspects of this game. Instead of there being an ammo type per weapon, there's only one with a frankly absurd conversion rate, meaning you can build a single super weapon and never run out of ammunition. Especially when you consider that on the standard difficulty, they just drop ammo and health on you like some overprotective parent. What would have been ammo has now been replaced with crafting materials, which again would have been fine if it wasn't for the fact that it was such tiny amounts that it takes approximately half a century to make anything worth a damn. And by that point, you've probably stumbled across the components anyway. But surely this isn't by design. EA wouldn't purposefully gimp their own game to force people into buying stupid microtransactions. Of course they bloody would. They even butchered the upgrade systems from 1 and 2 so you can't increase inventory. Weapon strength relies almost entirely on component parts, and frankly the standard plasma cutter just makes everything else look like weak old cat sick. So, other than gutting the game for corporate greed, what more do we have to talk about? Well, there are space sections that frankly exist for no other reason than to float around and farm piddly amounts of crafting materials. They also introduced side missions. Now, there's 3 issues with side missions in Dead Space 3. Firstly, they are all completely separate sections to the main game, so instead of being incidental, you have to go out of your way to do them, which just balks pacing for a game like this. Secondly, they are all just gauntlets of enemies on the way to the main goal. Nothing more complicated than that, which makes them very tedious to complete. And finally, all you get for completing them is a frankly insulting amount of upgrade materials every single time. These things simply exist to pad out the runtime and give the players a sense of pride and accomplishment. There's also the issue with general enemies. Because you can make an unholy super weapon capable of splitting the sun in twain, enemy balance is just off across the board. Enemies that were pants-wettingly terrifying in the previous 2 entries are now minor inconveniences at best. And the game's favourite way to impose a challenge is to throw entire rooms of necromorphs at you and hope your Necro Begone 5000 isn't enough to instantly vaporize them. Okay, I need to be candid for a moment. I actually like the idea of weapon crafting as a concept, tweaking something to be how you want to play, and it's very in line with the ethos this series has had since you first pick up the plasma cutter in 1. But poor balancing and money-grubbing decisions killed that idea and ultimately neutered most of the experience. Then there's the whole horror aspect that also fell by the wayside. The atmosphere of the previous titles is somehow muted while walking around the intergalactic equivalent of the base from The Thing. The only thing that this game has going for it is the jump scares, and like every game that is over-reliant on jump scares, that just gets boring fast. Frankly, the scariest part of this game is how bloody loud these doors are. Okay, now, is Dead Space 3 really that bad? In a bubble, it's not great. It's a decidedly average shooter with mild, cheap horror elements with a very generic and tedious story. But it's not in a bubble, is it? This is the 3rd installment of a beloved survival horror franchise. that lacks in both of those aspects. The conclusion to Isaac's story that reads like the writers were called in an hour before the game went live, and an important game mechanic designed to push people towards low value microtransactions. So yes, Dead Space 3 is pretty freaking bad. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and comment some suggestions of what games I should look into next. I am the Resident Gremlin, and I honestly don't hold out much hope for the Dead Space remake.